When it comes to using spreadsheets, I think a lot of people flash back to when they're in grade school and things like that, and all the hassle that went along with it. Nobody really wanted to learn Excel. But let me tell you that Google Sheets is so much more user-friendly than Excel was, and it's super easy to learn. So in this video, I'm going to show you a lot of the basic formulas that you need to be functional in Google Sheets. And you can do a lot with these formulas. Obviously, there's a lot more that you could do. This is a really good foundation. And if you want to practice while you go along with this video, I'll include a spreadsheet down in the caption. All you have to do is just make a copy and you'll have an editable version for yourself. Let's get started. All right, so here's our spreadsheet. If you have not made a copy yet, all you have to do is go to the link that's down in our caption, go to File, and then make a copy. And once you make a copy, you'll be able to edit it just like it's your own. Perfect. So right now we have our data set, and our data set is in this data tab. And let me just go over how it works just in case you're not familiar with Google Sheets yet. We have all of our columns up top. So we have column A, B, C, D, and so forth. Then on the left side, we have all of our rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And where each column and row intersects, that's called a cell. So for example, I clicked on this cell right here, and this is cell B3. It's always the column first, and then it's the row. And if you're not sure which cell you're currently on, over here to the left, you'll see this name box, and this will identify which cell you currently have selected. If you have multiple cells selected, you can do so by holding and dragging. You'll see the cell that you start with and the cell that you end with. All right, so this is just our data set. Most of the time, your formulas and your data are going to be separated. This is why I put it this way, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to go to the Sum tab. So for the Sum tab, it's exactly like you think it will be. This is the sum formula, and this will add up any numbers that are there. So every time you want to add a formula, all you have to do is type equals, and then you can start with the formula list. If you're not sure what formula to start with, you can go to Help, and then Function List, and this will give you a live view of every single formula. This is pretty confusing if you're starting out though, so I wouldn't recommend it. Just Google how to do something. But in this case, sum. So equals sum. And there's different sums that you'll use depending on your use case. If you simply want to know how much a specific total is, all you need is the sum formula specifically. So we'll type equals sum. And right down here, you'll see there's an explanation to show you kind of an example of what to do. Now you can add different numbers together. So for example, I can put the first value, comma, the second value, and so forth, and that will give me the numbers. But that's not really dynamic. You don't want to do that. Instead, all we need to do is simply select the total. So I'm going to see the total sales, and then press enter. So I can see that we have $6,765 in total sales from all of our products this year. So if you want to see a running total, that's what you need to do. Keep in mind that I selected it to only go through the range down through D16. So I have D6 all the way through D16. And you can see it's highlighted by this orange box. Now the problem with this is if I add a new one, so let's say I'm going to copy here and I'm going to say I got $100. This number did not change. And that's because the new value is out of range. So instead of doing it this way, I recommend simply going through the end of the column. And now when I press enter, it will include the new number. If I say 500, it will include all numbers as long as that number is within the end of the column. Now, it gets a little bit annoying whenever you have to drag all the way down. So I don't recommend doing that. Instead, all you have to do is select however many cells you want to. Just delete the row portion so you end with the column itself. And then you can press enter and it will give you what you need. Another way, if you want to do a super quick analysis to see what the total is, you can simply highlight the column. Then down here in the right side, it shows you the different aggregate formulas. So we have the sum, and you can see that this sum matches the sum that we just calculated. And then we have the average, the minimum, the maximum, the count, and then the count numbers. Now, the count includes everything. So for example, I have sales right here, so there is a value right there. That's why that one's showing 13, whereas the count numbers is showing 12. All right, so now what if we want to only see the totals for laptops? We'll use the sum if formula, and that's because we want to sum up the totals if a specific criterion exists. So we'll type equals sum if, and then press enter. And just so you know, if this doesn't exist, there'll be a little blue question mark right there. If you click that blue question mark, then you'll see this little help button pop up. All right, so There's also a helper range. So this shows you exactly what order everything needs to be in. So for example, sum if, we need to see the range and then the criterion. So this is the criterion range. In this case, we want to see how many laptops are there. So I will select all of the products. And once again, I want to anticipate future data. So I'm going to delete the last row and go all the way through the end of column A. And then the criterion, you can simply type inside quotes, laptop, and then we want the sum range. So the sum range will be everything in column D. So once again, I'm going to do D6 all the way through the end of column D and press enter. So you can see here that we have $2,300 that were sold with laptops. Now this is not formatted properly, so I'm just going to click on the cell, then click on the format as currency up here, and now we have it in the same format as we had before. And you don't have to type in the product. If there is a cell that contains the product instead, you can simply select the cell that contains that value. So for example, I can just select the cell that says laptop, press enter, and we get the same exact thing as we did before. Now for sum ifs, it's the same exact concept. The only difference is you can have multiple different criteria instead of just the one. So this is saying that we want to total something if one criterion exists and another criterion exists, and you can have as many criterion as you want. Difference is, instead of the sum range going last, now the sum range needs to go first. So we're going to do the sum range. So we're going to put D6 to D, and I want to see how many TVs were in the South. So for the first criterion range, I'm going to put the region, and I'm going to delete that to say C6:C, and then I will put South. And it doesn't matter if you have it all capitalized or anything like that, as long as it matches the actual text itself in this case, it will work. And then for the second criterion range, you can see right here, we're going to select all the products, delete to go all the way through the end of column A, and we will put TV. Now a few things to know. It doesn't matter what order the different criterions are in. As long as the criterions are listed, it will work. Another thing is if you get an error for a mismatch range. So for example, if I leave this one as 16, you'll see a value error, and it says that they're different size arguments. And it's exactly because of that. So all we need to do is double check the different ranges to make sure that they have the same number of cells in them. Then once you press enter, we'll have the value that we need. So you can see that we have one TV that was sold in the South, and it's totaling $800. So this is how it works for different sum formulas. Now, like I said before, the biggest thing with this is if you want it to be fixed, you can have the specific range only go to the end of the data. But the way to anticipate future data is to make it go all the way through the end of the column. And then once we update data later on, so say we get more sales, it will update automatically. So if we say 400 South and TV, you can see that this one right here updated from 800 to 1200 because it fell within that range. And once again with these, you don't have to spell it out. If you do spell it out with the text, make sure they're in quotes, but you can also select the cell that contains the name instead. So that's different sum formulas that you'll use on a normal basis. And these are very powerful, you can do a lot with them, but there's more. So let's say instead of sum, you want to count. So we want to count how many sales that we've completed instead of adding the totals together. There's a few different formulas you want to know. So we'll type equals count. And if you notice right here, it says returns the number of numeric values. And this is key right here, numeric values. So if I were to try to count something that was text, I'm going to get a 0. And that's because there are no numeric values inside of that text. But if I were to count something that is a numeric value, it will show me exactly how many numeric values exist in that range that I selected. And once again, we can go all the way through the end of the column to anticipate future data. Now, if we want to be able to count things that are including text, we can use the count A formula. And I like to think of this as count all, even though it's not really a count all. So this one gives you a number of values in a data set, whether it is in number form, date form, text form, whatever. I can click count A, and then I'll select the range, go through the end of the column, press enter. So I can see that we have 11 results, even though it's in text form. Now, just like sum, we can use the count if formula. And with this, we're going to count how many values exist if a specific criterion is there. So once you start having an if formula, it doesn't matter if it's going to be a number form or a text form, the value type doesn't matter. So don't worry about that. So we'll type equals count if, and then we want to select the range and then the criterion, and it's as simple as that. So let's say that we want to count how many values are there where the date is greater than 2024-3-18. So you can see we have 7 sales after March 18th of 2024. So you can see that out of the 11, there's 7 that are after March 18th, 2024. Now, if we wanted to make it to include March 18th, we can say greater than or equal to, and now it gives us 8 because it's including this value as well. Now, if you're doing greater than or equal to, you need to make sure that those are inside of the quotes. So for count ifs, it works the same exact way. So let's say we want to count ifs. So let's say we want to do a monitor. So I'm going to say A and then monitor. And then the next one we want to do is the region again, I guess. So this time we're going to say the region is East. And you can see we have 1 monitor that was sold in the Eastern region. Now count uniques. This one's interesting when it comes to products being sold for different customers. This will count how many times a specific value exists. So for example, we can say count unique and then select all of the customer IDs. And we'll go ahead and head down to the end of the column, right? So we have 11 different customer IDs as of right now. But what if the same customer ordered a few different times? So now you can see customer ID number 117 ordered 3 times. And now our count uniques is 9 instead of 11. And that's because these 3 right here are duplicate. And there's only 9 different customer IDs that are present. So we're going to say count unique ifs. So this is count unique ifs. And this one starts with the range that you want to count the unique values of. So we're going to count the unique values of the customers. And then for the criterion range 1, we're going to say in the north. And for criterion range 2, I'm going to say where the unit sold is greater than 1. And we have 2 unique values. So we have 2 people that are in the north region that purchased more than 1 item. All right, so now we have averages. So this is the same kind of concept. So we're going to type average, and this will simply find us the average amount. So I'm going to say the average of the sales. So we can see the average sale is 615. We can do average if, so average if. And then the criterion range, let's say we want to see the north. We want this to be north. And then we want this to be the average range. So $820 were sold on average in the north. And for average ifs, it works the same exact way. Multiple conditions can work. So we'll say average ifs, the average range, the product is laptop, and the region is south. You can see we have a divide by 0 error, and that's because there is no conditions that meet that criteria. So instead of that, let's go ahead and put north. And you can see that we have $1,150 on average for laptops sold in the north. You can find the minimum or the maximum values. So we'll say min and go ahead and select our range. So the minimum items sold were $65. And conversely for max, we can find the maximum values. So the maximum item sold was $1,200. So that's a good foundation of all the different aggregate formulas that you're going to use. Now let's say we want to make things dynamic and we want to bring different items into a grid. So let's go ahead and type in unique and then select our range. And this will give us all of the different unique values. You can find the total sales. So let's say we want to find the total sales of that items. If you remember, it is sum if. We'll select the product range and we'll go all the way through the end of the column. And then we will select the criterion. And once again, remember I said that you can not type it in, you can select the cell that contains it instead. So we're going to do that. So we will select A2. And then we need the sum range. So I'm going to select D10 all the way through the end of column D. So we have 2,300. What's cool with this is you can simply drag down this formula and it will apply to the different ranges dynamically. But one super critical thing to understand is that you need to understand cell referencing. So for example, you can see here we're referencing A10 to the end of column A, and we're referencing A2. Here, since we shifted one down, so now instead of referencing A10 to the end of column A and A2, we're referencing A11 to the end of column A and A3. So if I were to double click on this, we're referencing A3, which is exactly what we want. We want to look at the TVs instead of the laptop, but this shifted down one. So if this cell right here in A10 contained TV, that would not be included in our totals, and this would give you some bad data. So before you want to shift things down, we want to anchor things in and make it an absolute reference or a mixed reference. So you can use a hotkey of F4, and that will add a $ before each column and each row. This means that it will not move. Now there's another thing you can do where you can anchor in part. So in this case, we want column A to stay the same, but we do want row 2 to shift down as the formula shifts down. And then same thing with column D, we want that to be anchored in so it doesn't. Now you can type in F4, you can type in F4 again, you can kind of play around with it if you want to use hotkeys. You can type in the $ manually, but at the end of the day, if a $ is in front of a column or if a $ is in front of a row, it will not move regardless of if you drag that formula down to different cells. If it is not anchored in with a $, then it will move, it will shift, and you have to be careful about what you're doing. All right, so now if I drag this formula down, everything is working properly because we have anchored in what we need to anchor in. So this one, since we have the row not anchored in for the reference, it's now looking at monitor, but the product and the sales ranges are all fixed and we're good with that. Perfect, so now we can drag this formula over to the right, and this gives me the total sold still. Now this is why I anchored in the $ for the A. If I did not anchor the $ for the A, let me show you what happens. It changes to 0, and it's referencing cell B2 instead of cell A2. So that's why it's important to anchor in exactly what you need to anchor in. So I'm going to go ahead and anchor in column A again, and now I can do that. All right, so now instead of the total sales, we want to see the total number sold. So you can see here we have the total number sold, and right now we're referencing D10 to D. I'm simply going to change this to E10 to E. And now you can see instead of referencing the sale, we're referencing the total units sold. We don't need to be in dollar form anymore, so I can click on the 1, 2, 3, and then click number. I'll remove the decimals by clicking on the decrease decimal places button. And there we go. So now I can see exactly how many of each were sold. But let's say instead of having the total number sold, we want to count the numbers I've sold. So instead of SUMIF, we're going to put COUNTIF. And if you remember, we don't need this last portion right here because we're not adding anything up. We simply want the range and the criterion. So I'm going to press enter, and we can see that we have 2 laptops that were sold. Drag that formula down, the anchors work the same exact way. So we can see how many of each product was sold. Now let's say we want to have the average number of discounts for each product. We can type average if, select the criterion range, which in this case will be the product. I'll go all the way through the end of column A. Then we want to select the laptop, and then we want to select the range that we want to average. Now go all the way through the end of column H. So you can see right here, we have 0% discounts on average for laptops. Now remember, before we drag this formula down using this blue fill handle, we want to anchor things in. So I'm going to anchor in the $. So I'm going to anchor in the criterion range. I don't need to anchor in necessarily anything here because we're not shifting this formula over to the right or left anymore. But just for practice, let's go ahead and anchor in that column. And then let's go ahead and anchor in the average range as well. So now when I drag this formula down, you can see that on average, we have a 5% discount for TVs, a 10% discount for phones, 3% for tablets, and a 8% for monitors. All right, so The tab's called dynamic. What's dynamic about this? Yes, it is partly dynamic because we're able to shift things down, but there's more to it. So let's say we want to see this exact data, but we want it to be based off of the specific regions. So instead of count if formulas, we need to make them count ifs formulas. And I want to make it dynamic, so I can simply select an item from a dropdown and we're good to go from there. So I'm going to click on a cell, go to Insert, Dropdown. And you can add the values manually right there, but instead I want to drop down from a range. So I'm going to select the data, and I'm going to go all the way through the end of column C. And you can see here it extracts the single unique value for each item that exists. So we have north, south, and east. I'm going to click done, and now you'll see that that drop down exists right here. If something was added later, so for example west is automatically added to the drop down as well. All right, so for the sum, we need to change this into a sum ifs formula. And if you remember correctly, the sum ifs formula has the sum total at the beginning instead of the end. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to the beginning and put a comma. So we have the sum range at the beginning now. We have the criterion range 1 and we have the criterion range 2. Now for the criterion range 3, I'm going to select the region all the way through the end of column C and simply select this drop down. And you can see here we have a 0. And the reason why we have a 0 is because nothing's selected. But if I selected north, it will show 2300. If I select south, it will show 0, and so forth. And that's because the laptop was only sold in the north. But what if we want to make it where if no region is selected, it shows the total sales instead of no sales? All we have to do is go to our criterion and then put a quote, asterisk quote, and then an ampersand. And now you can see that it will show it if nothing is there. Asterisk is a wildcard and the ampersand is a join. So what this is doing for the ampersand is it's joining the contents of this asterisk with whatever is selected in the dropdown. Since nothing is selected, the wildcard is saying to include all values. But if something was selected, so for example, north, this would be the same exact thing as saying asterisk and north. So same exact thing as asterisk north. Remember, we need to have this in quotes, so that's the same exact thing. Let me know if you want a full video on wildcards, but in this case, take my word for it, it will work. So just like last time, we don't want F2 to change. We don't want it to shift down or up because it's pointing to this specific cell. So I'm going to anchor those in with dollar signs. And then we want the criterion range to stay the same as well. So I'm going to anchor those in with dollar signs. So now I can drag this formula down and we can see exactly how many of each product was sold in that specific region of the north. And then I can simply select a different option from the dropdown and it will show me the sales for that region that I have selected. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for count ifs. So count ifs, we have the criterion range 1 and then the criterion 1. All we need is criterion range 2. So in this case, it is column C for the region. And then we're going to select that cell again. Once again, works the same exact way. If we wanted to show everything if no region is selected, we'll put quote, asterisk quote, ampersand, and then reference the cell. And we'll see that there are 2 that exist. Now I'm going to anchor those in. And then we can drag this down. So for example, if I want to select the north, we can see that 2 laptops sold, 1 phone, 1 tablet, and 1 monitor. Then we'll do the same thing for average ifs. Just like sums, we need to reorder. So we need to cut the average range, paste that at the beginning. Then we have our criterion range. We have our criterion 1. In case you didn't notice, you can select different parts of the cell and it will highlight which one you're on. So right here we have criterion range 1. If I were to select A2, it's the criterion 1. And then we have H, but that's not the criterion range we want. We want the region, so I'm going to select C10 all the way through the end of column C. I'll go ahead and anchor that in with dollar signs, put a comma, quote, asterisk quote, ampersand, and then I'm going to select cell F2 and anchor that in. Perfect. So now we can do the same thing as last time and drop that down. And now we have this full grid so we can see exactly what's going on in each region. We have this divide by zero error, and that's because there is nothing that was sold in that region. And if you remember from math, if you have a zero at the bottom in the denominator, it doesn't work, it doesn't exist, you'll get an error message. One thing you can do to combat this is type in if error, and then after a comma, you put the value of error. So for example, instead of having an error message, we could simply put a dash indicating there was no results. And now, if I drag this down, instead of that error message, it will show a dash. Another thing we could do is put a number, so we can have a 0. So if there was no results, instead of having an error message, it now shows 0%. So now you have a good understanding of the core foundations. If you want some more tips that's beginner friendly all the way to more advanced features, check out this video that's 31 tricks and treats in Google Sheets. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and like it.